I guess we'll get started. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I know that everyone probably is working from home, and that brings about new challenges when trying to participate in events that are scheduled for a specific time. So I appreciate that everyone was able to find time to join us. Today we have Matt Ruen and Marcia, both from Grand Valley State University, talking about open access and managing open access resources. And Matt is going to go first. He is the Scholarly Communications Outreach Coordinator at Grand Valley, and I'm just going to turn it over to him. Once he's done, we will take some questions if there are any for Matt, and then we'll move to Marcia, and then we'll take questions again, and then we'll just have discussion if there's any. So Matt, go ahead.
All right. Hi, everyone. As Patrick said, I'm the Scholarly Communications Outreach Coordinator.
Nice. You're really ready.
Want to start out with a caveat or disclaimer that I am very much not an expert in the things that many of you are experts in, collections management, e-resource management, discovery systems. I come at this from the open access advocacy and education direction. My title basically means that I talk to people about open access and other changes in the ways that academic information is published. But I'm going to talk about kind of the intersection between open access and discovery from that kind of open access perspective. There we go. So a quick definition of open access for anyone who might not be familiar. I like to think of open access, the open in open access, like the open in open source, as meaning free plus permission. So open access scholarly literature is free to access and read, and also carries some other permissions, whether that's just permission to download a copy of that and retain a copy of that online information, or share that copy, or revise, modify, build on, do text and data mining, lots of different things. There's a pretty wide spectrum of what counts or what is considered to be open access by different people. I've got a couple of definitions up here. If you're new to the idea of open access, I really recommend Peter Suber's very brief introduction to open access. It's a paragraph and a half, I think. And it's a really good starting place. A couple of other definitions that are useful in thinking about where and how to find open access scholarly literature, and that come up in a lot of the scholarly and practical discussions about open access, are gold OA and green OA. And these are two terms that refer to the process by which a given piece of work becomes openly accessible. So, looks like I messed up the formatting a little bit on this slide. Cool. Sorry for that. So gold open access is, a journal article, a book chapter, something else that is open access at the point of publication. Usually this is a journal or a book publisher that is making the material openly accessible. There are a lot of open access journals that are completely open access, but there's also a large amount of open access content that is gold open access material that was made open access at the article level in subscription journals. That's usually by payment of a fee. Unsurprisingly, the big commercial publishers are all pretty happy to accept extra money to make articles openly accessible. The other main type of open access content is called green open access or self-archiving open access. And this green just means that the process by which the material is made OA takes place outside of the publication venue. Usually that's an author choosing to make their article or their chapter available online. Sometimes a publisher will automatically make individual chapters or articles available online, often through PubMed Central or other repositories that research funders have set up. One of the most important things about green open access is that it's often not the version of record, not the final published version of the article. Most of the subscription journals, which allow self-archiving, and that's by far the majority of subscription journals, they allow self-archiving of an earlier version of that article. Usually that's the accepted manuscript or post-print. Sometimes it's the submitted manuscript before peer review, as opposed to the accepted manuscript, which is after the article has been peer reviewed and any revisions are made and it's accepted for publication, but before the publisher goes in and adds in formatting and layout and design to make the article look pretty. You may also occasionally come across discussions that refer to bronze OA or platinum or diamond OA. I don't think those terms haven't really caught on yet. I don't think they're going to. They're pretty unnecessary. It's really hair splitting between like usually different types of gold OA. And I'm not even sure that most of us in the open access community really need to be spending our time worrying about that, much less people whose job isn't focused on open access. But there are terms that you'll see in various research articles and commentary pieces, blog posts, that sort of thing. OA content can be found in a lot of different places. So there are fully open access journals, there are book publishers that produce fully open access monographs and edited volumes. As I mentioned, there's a lot of article level open access in subscription journals. There are a lot of different repositories for open access scholarly work. These generally fall into these kind of four categories or varieties. Institutional repositories that libraries set up to provide green open access to work produced at that institution. Subject repositories that are for a specific scholarly discipline. Archive, arxiv.org, is one of the longest standing open access repositories. It's a place for physics and mathematics scholars to share their pre-submission research. There are data specific repositories, and then there are some government or research funder supported repositories, and PubMed Central is a good example of one of those. And there's plenty of open access content to be found on personal websites. A lot of open access content, although not all of it, is indicated by Creative Commons licenses, which you have probably seen on various materials. I can go into this if people have a lot of questions, but basically a Creative Commons license is a straightforward way for someone who creates content to tell other people how that content can be used. There are 6 different licenses. comprised of 4 different terms. And yeah, if you have questions, I'm happy to go back to this and talk a bit more about how these work. But there's a human readable layer that's meant for people to, just for the average user to understand. There's a legal layer so that it's, so it's a legally valid license. And there's a machine readable layer that allows search engines or other tools to identify openly licensed material. So that connects to discovery, obviously. One of the, so this is one of the big themes that I notice when thinking about open access and discovery is in the open access community, we're paying a lot more attention to new ways to share content, new content to share. How can we figure out, how can we get more material to become open access? There's a lot more attention to that than to improving and refining the open access resources that, oh, and I spelled that interestingly. So a lot less attention to refining the existing open access materials. Some of the ways that people working on open access content approach making their material discoverable. The big one is through providing relatively good metadata for automated harvesting. This is especially true in repositories, which pretty much all strive to have our content be harvestable through OAI PMH. As with any metadata, the quality of given metadata depends on what is input, and that can vary pretty widely. But with that note, of a large quantity of open access content can be harvested this way. A lot of the people, or a lot of the platforms that provide open access publishing tools, whether that's journals or repositories, put a fair amount of effort into optimizing those resources for search engines. That's often the or one of the primary ways that users find open access content, is that they don't necessarily know that they're looking for open access material. They're looking for some type of information in Google Scholar, and they come up with the result and they can access it without a paywall. There's a growing number of commercial databases and discovery tools that are incorporating open access content. So Summon and Primo, Web of Science, Scopus, all have features that allow open access content to be flagged, to be brought into a library's discovery tool. There are also some tools specifically focused on finding open access versions of paywalled content. And the two leading tools here are Unpaywall and the Open Access button. And the idea with these is, so Unpaywall is a database, the Open Access button is a search engine. And the idea is you find a paywalled article that you want to access, you can't access it, and you use either Unpaywall or the Open Access button to look for an open access version of that article. Here are just a few noteworthy open access directories and lightly curated collections of materials. So the directory of open access journals, the directory of open access books, the directory of open repositories. You can guess from the titles what those directories are directories of. Most notably here, the directory of open access journals is regarded as pretty close to a whitelist of open access journals that are at least following good publishing practices. Many of these, well, the directory of open access journals and the directory of open access books and other open access collections often work on, or often have APIs or other ways to push metadata records out to libraries or other service providers. So for example, at GVSU, we use Summon as our discovery layer, and we've turned on the feature in Summon to automatically include all of the journals in the directory of open access journals in our search results. A recently launched service that is a bit controversial is the Open Research Library from Knowledge Unlatched. And on the one hand, they've got a pretty neat aim, which is to be a kind of one-stop shop for finding open access content, whether that's journals, books, articles, data sets, etc. There are some concerns on the open access advocacy, open access community side about the potential for a service like this to essentially monopolize access to open access content. And then, so my last slide here, just some challenges for that I see in the discovery landscape for open access materials. First of all, quality, determining what is or isn't good enough to be included in a given library's collection of resources is challenging. Because there's no one definition of quality. And many of the indicators of a poor quality or a sloppy journal are the same. You know, a poor quality journal or a scam journal has many of the same features as a brand new, completely legitimate journal that is being launched by a group of scholars. And so sorting through that is a challenge. Another challenge is that institutional repositories are really varied in the types of content that they have. And so a couple years ago, we had a conversation or two at GVSU about whether we wanted, like, how clearly we wanted our institutional repository content to show up in our discovery system. And one of the challenges there is that, or one of the things we encountered is that our repository includes material that is open access. It includes some material that is limited access, only available for people on our campus network. It includes self-archived versions of scholarly articles, as well as undergraduate honors papers and kind of everything in between. So thinking about how to reflect this, this great variety that isn't always captured in the metadata is kind of tricky. From the open access advocacy side, again, a challenge that many of us are always looking at is the desire of commercial vendors to recapture the market. And then what I think is one of the more interesting challenges, and one where deliberate work by collections developers, collections managers, discovery system experts can have a really large impact is in the ways that discovery tools can reinforce existing biases. So the open access movement, the idea of free access to scholarly literature, has enabled those of us in the global north to theoretically benefit from an enormous amount of research that takes place in the global south. But the tools that we're using to find and evaluate research, things like Web of Science or Scopus, have a Western or global north or English language bias. So with these existing tools, it can be challenging for newer journals or journals outside of North America and Europe to gain visibility. And so that challenge is something that can be addressed deliberately. It's a reason to not simply wait on tools like Web of Science or Scopus to index more open access content, because they're looking at traditional sources of prestigious scholarship first. So I know I've talked longer than I had intended to, and I also feel like I've talked very quickly. Does anyone have questions?
Hi, Matt. This is Leanne from Marcia Library at Hillsdale College. I have a question for you. The green OA, you said, is generally released before peer review. So when you are using something like in Summon, that they go out and they're looking for this open access material, can you distinguish in Summon that you want just gold OA, or do you have to take it all in?
So I think, and I am not the right person at GVSU to answer this authoritatively, but I believe that the default tools in Summon for finding open access content, that they're looking for gold OA. One of the things that Unpaywall's APIs can do is kind of incorporate more of the searching for green open access content along with subscription content or gold open access materials. And most green OA is peer reviewed. It's generally kind of after peer review, but before the publisher formatting. And
I misunderstood.
The exact permissions that a given publisher allows varies. Those permissions vary often by the journal. Nearly every publisher, and certainly the big commercial publishers, allow some form of self-archiving. Most of that self-archiving is the post-print or accepted manuscript. Some only allow the preprint to be shared, and some disciplines have a culture where preprints or submitted manuscripts are shared widely and frequently. Does that make some sense?
Yes, thank you.
the tools for, or the various platforms that share green open access materials, when that work, that resource is something that either has been published or is going to be published, the best practice, and also usually a requirement from the publisher, is that there be a note in somewhere in the metadata for that resource that this is the accepted manuscript version of an article that was published in whatever journal. Here's the citation to the version of record, and that helps both the publisher and the journal direct traffic to the version of record. But by providing that citation information in a DOI, that's how tools like Unpaywall or the open access button are able to find the open access versions of subscription articles.
There's a question in the chat, Matt. This is from Ronti, I think from MSU. It says, does your collection development policy include green OA? And do you share those to be findable via summon or the library catalog, or via summon through like a catalog upload?
Currently, it does not include green OA. We've started using a couple of the tools related to, or the tools provided by Unpaywall. And where I see the biggest potential for green OA is when someone does a search for a particular article, that just like in Google Scholar, where there's a get, you can set it up so there's a get this at your institution. Where I think there's a lot of potential for green OA is to show a freely available through Unpaywall link along with the link or the metadata to the version of record. So if someone is searching and they go, they find a result that looks promising, they go to that resource. We don't have a subscription for it. We just have, it just shows up in our indexing services. That there's kind of an easy route for those people to search for the green OA version. But it's not currently part of our collection development policy or our catalog and discovery services, largely because there are some messy questions about how do we distinguish between the different types of things that you can find in institutional repositories.
Are there any other questions for Matt? There should be some time at the end if you have additional questions. So I'm going to give it to the old 10 count. All right, thank you, Matt. And now we'll have you stop sharing and then have Marcia share. And this is, and so Marcia Lee, she's the, I always get her title wrong. Oh, thank you, you put it up on the screen. eResources and Acquisitions Librarian at Grand Valley, and she's gonna talk about managing these resources. Go ahead, Marcia, thank you.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't find how to unmute when I had my screen shared. Okay. All right, so as Patrick said, I am the eResources and Acquisitions Librarian at Grand Valley. I've been in this role for just over a year, and I've been with Grand Valley for just under 3 years. I was an eResources specialist prior to moving into this role. I think Matt did an awesome job explaining the big picture of OA, and my presentation is going to be, I have 2 slides and very simple. It should be short and sweet. Just showing you from our perspective, as far as the eResources team, how we manage requests that we get and how decisions are made about what to add to our collection, and then how we handle setup and management of these types of resources. So I'm going to start by saying, giving a little bit of background. So based on notes and records that I've been able to find in our system, it looks like when we started with our knowledge base, we used Intoda, which aka Serial Solutions, and Summon as our discovery layer. When we started with these several years ago, at the time, our head of collections and then the previous Patrick, it had a different name, but head of systems and discovery, basically. It looks like they were the ones who made the decision as far as whether collections should be turned on in Intoda, made discoverable in Summon, and then they tracked them in our knowledge base. And we have it set up with Serial Solutions that we get monthly mark record files. So we load those into our catalog each month. So all of our e-journals are discoverable that way as well. And so we basically use Intoda for discovery, but also we have a lot of notes in there to say, this is when it was turned on, this is why, if there was a requester, that type of information. So that's how it previously, those bigger e-journal collections were turned on years ago, and they remain on to this day. And then moving into current day, we have a couple different ways that we receive requests or information about what collections or resources should be made available. And one way, probably the most common way, is we get an email from a liaison librarian saying a teaching faculty member has come across an e-journal and they would like it to be made accessible through the library. And then the second way, so those are kind of like those one-off titles that we turn on, and we'll loop in our head of collections to say, hey, this is happening. And then as of last year, we had a new position created in the collections team, and it's our government and open collections librarian. So we now loop in Elizabeth, that Elizabeth is her name. We loop her in as well when we get these types of requests. But within the last few months, she's also started doing, well, she started this position last year. And so one of the new workflows is that part of her responsibility is to research different collections that she thinks we should add and make accessible. So within the last few months, I meet with her and our head of collections and our collection strategists weekly. So at one of these meetings, she brought forth a report where she had recommended 5 or 6 different ebook collections that are open and freely available that she thought we should pursue, look into getting MARC records for. And so those are kind of the ways that our eResources team is, we get those requests. Those requests come in either through our head of collections, liaisons, or our open collections librarian. And then as far as setting up these resources, just like our paid for content, as you're all familiar with, our e-journals, if it's an e-journal package or collection or a one-off title, we go into Intoda, we turn that on. Ebook collections, we go out to the provider website, see if we can get MARC records there. If not, I found, especially for these freely available collections and open access, that a lot of them are available only through OCLC Collection Manager. And so if we can't get the MARC records directly through the provider, we'll go to the OCLC Collection Manager and pull them there and get them into our catalog. And then rarely, like I said, a lot of these resources like PubMed Central, Medline, things that we have on our database list, platforms, that type of stuff, they were set up years ago. So we, in the last few years, haven't had things like that come through. But if that were part of the request, this would be the point in time where our team would then set that up on the database list and link out to that resource as well. And then again, just like our paid for content, if we add a full collection or platform, we are likely to share that with the entire library staff, usually via email or our intranet. And then if it's like one of those one-off requests that I had mentioned, we would just follow up with the liaison librarian and then loop in the head of collections and open collections librarian, just so that we're all on the same page and know what's being added to our collection and why. And then, so beyond setup, for those ebook collections, we, right now, I believe we ended up adding 5 collections earlier this year. And so we added them to our MARC upkeep schedule, which right now we have them being updated annually. And so we're having one of our eResources specialists go in and pull those records wherever they're available, if they're just to check to see if there's any updates each year. So fairly minimal effort and at this point in time in our workflows as far as MARC upkeep for the ebook collections. And then on the slide I mentioned spot checks for those e-journal collections, and then those one-off titles. We add those to our collection confirmation list, which also includes all of our paid for collections as well, but we kind of have them listed in a level of priority. And the document includes a lot of information like the number of titles that are included with each collection, the last time that someone went in and checked links to make sure access was working. This is often a student employee's responsibility. And one of the challenges that I'll talk about in a minute that is related to this is that because we place a lot of priority on our paid for content, unfortunately the open access and freely available collections fall to the wayside in terms of spot checking and making sure those links are working and URLs are kept up to date. So I think I went into the document today just to double check what was in there, and some of the freely accessible journal packages that we've turned on, the most recent one, or one was most recently verified back in 2016. So that is definitely something that we place higher priority on, that paid for content, of course. And then finally, usage data. This is right now very specific to just those resources and collections that we have linked to on our database table. We historically, somebody on our team has pulled data each year using libanalytics, and it's purely looking at the number of times that the links have been clicked on through the database list. So it's not giving a ton of information. This data also includes all of our MiALA resources, and so we pull that, and then that data goes to our head of collections, and we pull it for the calendar year. So we send that on to the head of collections, and theoretically that information is used to determine whether or not there's some low use resources, that free resources that we could maybe remove from the database list. I've never seen the data actually impact a decision and make or motivate a decision. So that's actually something that we're reviewing, whether or not we need to continue to pull that data and use staff time for that, maybe just for MiALA moving forward. Yeah, so those are kind of our workflows on the eResources team. And then, so then moving on, just some potential issues and challenges that we've faced that are also fairly inherent to, or sometimes inherent to these types of resources. Obviously the fact that you're not entering into any sort of license agreement and you're not paying, obviously, access is not guaranteed, and we're kind of at the mercy of the provider, the publisher. And I mean, that can be said for a lot of the stuff we pay for too, but that's just one thing to consider. Upkeep, as I mentioned, and was evident in the fact that we haven't checked a lot of our links in a few years. Upkeep often falls to the wayside for these resources. It's a lower priority for us right now than it is for paid content. And so yeah, ultimately we rely on users for a lot of to report when issues arise for anything that we make accessible, but especially for this type of resource. And I don't know that that's fair, but that is the reality right now. The next few bullet points kind of go hand in hand. I think they're all linked, that sometimes the lack of infrastructure on the publisher provider side, especially if it's like volunteer-based or the staff, as far as the staff goes, there might be a lack of support if you run into any access issues. We've experienced where either we can't find a contact, or when we finally do, we don't hear back ever, or it takes a long time. And Matt mentioned metadata quality. Same thing. I think that's related to the fact that there isn't the staff to create that high quality metadata and records. So that ultimately impacts discoverability. And then just MARC record availability. I found that even the providers and publishers that make them available at their site, sometimes it's clunky, and you got to do a lot of formatting conversions or in order to get it to the right format in order to ingest it into our system. And then availability of usage data on a lot of these titles is sometimes not available. And so that makes it hard to quantify the value that it's adding to our collection. And finally, just it's important for our team too and for anyone who works in this to be mindful of the amount of time that we invest in setup or troubleshooting of these types of resources. We just need to have, I think, it's a kind of a case-by-case basis of why did we set this resource up if we're experiencing issues with it. Our team approaches it very much so like on a case-by-case basis. So if we start to spend a lot of time and we're not able to fix an issue easily or find the right contact, at least we do our due diligence and communicate that out to if a faculty member requested it, let them know. And let them know that maybe it's just makes most sense to turn it off at this point. Yeah, so I think, unfortunately, I don't have there's no great solutions to a lot of these challenges. It's just the reality, but just things to be mindful of as we do this work. And that is all I have. But if there's any questions, I see some chat stuff happening.
Marcia, this is Leanne again. Along with the chat that Matt and Deja have been talking about, I was curious what people are doing with those hybrids where it's a mix of OA and non-OA paid content. And do you add that to your collection? To me, they cause more problems than they're worth, but I'm curious to hear what other people are doing.
Yeah, so yeah, I think at this point, the only hybrid stuff that we would have is if we're paying for it. I know we did this year, we started our subscription to Faculty Select through EBSCO, and I don't know how much use it's getting. We haven't looked at that recently, but I know that they try to throw collections in there, and especially like their they're DRM free ebooks. Of course, they want to make sales as well. So for right now, our workflow is to not make anything available that would require at any level of potentially prompting for payment or anything like that. So yeah, this is all a gray area, and we have new staff, and I'm fairly new, so we're working through all of this. But at this point, we are not, to my knowledge, unless it's fully available, we're not making it accessible on our end.
When that's sort of this is Matt again. Like that sort of trade-off between kind of a user experience that might prompt people to pay versus maybe some of the articles are open access. Like that tension is one of the, I guess, secondary reasons that a lot of conversations about making content open access, especially from grant funding agencies, are moving away from the idea of allowing or encouraging publication in hybrid journals. The other problem is that it's a sustainability, a price sustainability nightmare. But yeah, interesting idea, but the hybrid experiment doesn't seem to have worked out for libraries or researchers as well as it has worked out for the large publishers.
I see in chat, I do like that policy of having whoever requested the one-off titles, they should be in charge of spot checking. It's not bad.
Has anyone else experienced, I don't really want to call it resistance, but when we got an open access facet, the first question I got from the other faculty was like, well, is there a way to do it so that we only have the paid content and not any of the open access in there, like GovDocs? And I'm like, no. And I would think open access, but yeah.
Yeah, we haven't heard too much. I don't think Faculty Select is getting as much use as we thought it might, but might just be we need to push it more. But I know until we removed those DRM-free ebooks from EBSCO, that caused a lot of course, people are saying, I thought everything in here was free and openly available, and then EBSCO snuck in their collection. So once we turn that off, but yeah, there's definitely skepticism as far as the quality of open access stuff that we turn on. So
this is Mary Beaker. I'm from a community college, and so you guys are doing work that are I'm following this, but only just trying to figure out some of the lingo that you're talking about. And so, Matt, I was wondering, you mentioned hybrid model, and is that where publishers have a journal and some are open access and some are not? Can you explain hybrid?
Yeah, so hybrid open access started off as an idea of a way for, or a pathway for subscription publishers to move from subscription publishing to fully open access publishing, rather than ask Elsevier or Springer or whoever to immediately jump from the financial predictability of subscription revenue to start offering open access on an individual article level or individual article basis. So an author submits something to Nature, let's say, and they have an opportunity to pay an extra fee and have that article be published open access. So people can find the version of record, they can read it, they don't need to have a subscription to Nature, they don't need to pay a per article access fee. It's out there, it's openly licensed. The idea was that, or the theory was that more and more authors would start making that choice, and more of the articles in a given journal would become open access, and eventually the publisher would switch from subscription to just having that journal be open access. In practice, the publishers have said, oh, we've got a separate revenue stream that's coming in from these author fees for individual articles. We're going to keep selling subscriptions and keep selling kind of individual article level open access. Does that kind of clear up?
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any other questions? I don't know if I missed any in the chat or not. I've been trying to follow along. Don't think so. Go ahead with your unrelated question.
All right, I just felt I should warn you because it's kind of a total squirrel. But does anybody have any feelings besides my sadness that Lita is gone and we're all going to be a part of CORE? I assume most of you guys are in ALA. So yeah, I'm not quite sure if anybody else has any thoughts on that.
I guess for me, a lot of my job is overlapping multiple areas, so I'm okay with it. But maybe if I was more focused on just one of the areas, it might bother me more, as there might be less specialization. But I'm not sure. Also, it is cheaper, so that's good.
Yeah, this is Tranti. I think what I like is well, I both Lita and Alex, and then so the potential reducing cost for me is good, but also I like the idea of Llama because that actually allows me to get involved more in Llama. I'm not exactly manager, quote unquote, but then a lot of things provided by Llama interest me for my future growth. And that's actually a benefit for me, being able to access Llama stuff.
Fair enough. I'm not trying to totally hate on it. It's just Lita had a very different culture that I'll miss. Well, maybe it'll still be there. Who knows? Very nerdy. Not that metadata nerds aren't nerdy too.
Maybe different levels of nerdiness. I'm not sure.
Flavors. It's kind of like geeks. There's different flavors of geeks.
Flavors of nerdiness.
Yeah.
Flavors of nerdiness. All right.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? All right. Well, Matt and Marcia, thank you very much for presenting, and thank you everyone for finding time in your day to come and learn with us.